Issues we talk about tonight are not very comfortable, but you ought to pay attention to them.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Good Tuesday evening to you. Thanks very much for joining us and my state of mind, which on any given day, you know, just like yours. Wife just texted me, the roof's leaking. I hate it when that happens. Don't you hate it when that happens?
I do.
Jess, you hate it when that happens? Yeah. So, hey, you get the raw Dan York State of Mind every evening here. We're taping this program yesterday, so we're going to skip the rundown and tackling the issues of the day and catch up to that as the week wears along here. But a friend of mine said to me, hey, listen, you really need to pay attention to some of the project work that's going on in this community. And he's a senior member of the Coalition for the Homeless. And I say homeless, it's kind of there are a couple of big words that I say that you go, I say budget, you go, you know, when I say budget crisis, you go, okay. Well, so we've had a budget crisis here in the state where the Senate President and the House Speaker aren't getting along very well, or trying to put a deal together, or something going on, and that makes everybody kind of pay attention. But the budget is the actual operating lifestyle for the state of Rhode Island. I say homeless, a lot of you say, it's uncomfortable. I say sex trafficking, then you go, right? But you know what? These are the kinds of things and real life issues that are happening, you know, right underneath our noses. And sometimes it's just good to get a little orientation as to what's going on with some of these key issues. Like this particular headline that recently brought some attention to this for everybody. Grant will allow the Sojourner House to provide safe housing for victims of sex trafficking. So we're going to start with that, and we'll talk about the homeless issue conditions here in the state. It's something that when we look away from, I think it's a moral question in a lot of ways. So let me say hello to my guests who are empathetic about my roof linking. Vanessa is the executive director of the Sojourner House, and Christine is the board president. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Got any roofers you can recommend to me?
I do, actually. We should talk.
All right, excellent, terrific. That headline is kind of jolting in some ways and pleasing in others, right? Because you've been able to get some funding to attack this challenge.
Yes, so we did receive some grant funds last year in 2016 to start this program, which provides housing and supportive services to victims of trafficking. Sojourner House currently is the only agency in Rhode Island who is able to provide housing for victims of trafficking. So one question I get sometimes is people will say to me, I didn't know trafficking was a problem in Rhode Island. That's something that happens in New York City or Boston. You know, that wouldn't happen here in Rhode Island.
Right.
But I can tell you it is happening. We're getting referrals to the program. We started, the shelter opened up formally in December of 2016. And most nights we have between 6 and 8 people staying in that shelter who would otherwise be homeless without our services.
Because they are victims of sex trafficking?
Yes. So
okay, so let's the Sojourner House is, well, you're the board president, so
Yes.
tell me about what the Sojourner House's mission is.
Sure. So we are a comprehensive domestic violence agency, and we serve you know, victims, obviously, of domestic violence. We also work on prevention. The breadth of programs that we offer is pretty amazing. We help so many different communities. We have a lot of services for immigrants. We have a shelter just for men. We just help so many people, and then we even have a summer camp for children who've been affected by domestic violence.
This domestic violence thing is just mind-blowing to me. And
Yeah.
I see a lot of bad trends in behavior, especially with young people right now, that really, really worry me. So I'd like to dig into that a little bit later as we go along in the broadcast. The sex trafficking thing, is this merely a prostitution business problem thing? What is it?
No, I mean, a lot of clients we're serving in that program are actually foreign-born who have been literally trafficked to the United States, brought here by other individuals, sold into sex work. So because of that, we also provide immigration assistance. We can help victims of trafficking with what's called a T visa. So if they are foreign born and a victim of trafficking, we can help them apply for a visa that's specifically for victims of trafficking. We then are able to help them access some basic needs, money to purchase food, basic supplies, and then we can provide them with housing in our housing program. So this is a pretty large problem.
What is it, so what's the currency? What's the marketplace? I mean, it's icky to ask these questions, but there's no sex trafficking if there's no market for the product, correct?
But there is a market for it. Yes.
What is that market, and what does it look like? Is it? I don't have a good feel for what the prostitution. We are talking about prostitution. Is the end service here for the sex trafficking, correct?
Well, prostitution.
Is that different?
I wouldn't use the term prostitution.
Okay,
We're talking about victims of
educate
trafficking.
me.
Someone who is forced into selling sex against their will, and a lot of times someone who is trafficked is brought across international or state lines. So we have clients who are brought to us from New York, Boston, but it is also happening here in Rhode Island. Some of the victims are U.S. citizens, but a large percentage of the clients we're working with are actually foreign-born from other countries who were forced to come here.
Okay, so is it that the term prostitution is no longer politically correct, or it's just not accurate because the victims, as you say, and when I say this, I don't mean to diminish, I'm just saying, and you characterize them as victims, does that mean that they are here completely or performing services completely against their will?
Exactly.
And so prostitution is different in the sense that it's voluntary? It's...
I personally...
You guys,
sure. So
free wheel here.
the term prostitution could imply that someone is willingly engaging in sex work. So someone willingly engages to exchange sex for money. That could be described as prostitution. Trafficking is a form of forced sex without the consent of the victim. So oftentimes, as I said, someone will be brought in from another country.
Are they being compensated?
Well, they're often lured by the promise of financial goods, but oftentimes they don't know exactly what they are agreeing to. And so it really affects, it affects all types of victims, but there's definitely a market, to use your term, for young women, young girls, young teenagers, young adults that maybe are homeless, maybe are having trouble at home, maybe don't have solid support or financial resources, and they're lured into this promise of financial compensation if they, develop a relationship. A lot of times it's a man or an entity promising to be a boyfriend or be a partner, and then they wind up selling that individual.
They end up with some creative lifestyle, freelancing
Exactly.
a little bit, and there you go.
Right.
But when you said the sex trafficking thing, if these young ladies are coming across for whatever, ocean or wherever they're coming from, are they coming with the expressed intent to at least pursue this line of work, or are they being tricked into it?
So let me give you an example. So I want to tell a story of a client that we've actually served at our agency for the past 2 years. This woman was 15 when she met this man. She was in a South American country. I don't want to disclose too much information out of confidentiality, but she was in a foreign country. She met a man who promised her a better life. He said, if you come with me, I can give you a better life. He brought her to the United States. When they got here to the States, she was still a minor. She was 15, 16 at that point. And he started selling her for sex. He would arrange these deals with other men, and he would sell her for sex. And she became pregnant at a young age. She was 16 when she had her first child. And she was completely reliant on this individual because she was here in the country undocumented. She didn't legally have a visa to be here. She then was young and pregnant and with someone that she didn't know very well and didn't even speak the language here in the United States. When she came to us a couple years ago, she was literally living in a basement, a rat-laden infested basement, because she had escaped from him.
With the baby?
With the baby. She had escaped from him. It was the only place she could be what she thought was safe. I mean, the environment she was living in was not very safe. She came to our agency. We were able to provide her with safe housing and supportive services. And during the process of working with her, we were able to help her get what's called a T visa, which is a visa for victims of trafficking. She now has part-time work. She now has her own house. So she's now self-sufficient. But that's just an example, and I mean every story is unique. There are different types
Right.
of situations, but that is not an unusual
Well,
story.
it's clear to me, Vanessa, you're working this day in, day out. You're running the show over there. You're the board president. So what I don't want to leave you out of this conversation. What is what is the board's mission here with this particular challenge? I mean, what direction are you giving your executive director on this?
Sure. Well, a big mission of our board, in all honesty, is fundraising. We are supported by a lot of grants. We have a lot of wonderful grants from all kinds of sources, a lot of federal grants, but we want to make sure we diversify our funding because you never know what could happen with a grant. We've added a lot of programs and staffing, and we want to make sure that we can be sustainable in the future. So one thing we've done, we've started an endowment. We are increasing our spring campaign fundraising every year. We're doing a lot of strategy sessions to make sure that we can grow our donor network. But we really want to make sure that the work we're doing, when that story was told at a recent board meeting, I mean, you couldn't hear a pin drop in the room. Everybody's just obviously so affected by this, and we want to make sure that we can continue offering these services.
Are you and other board members there because you have a life story, or because you just have a natural, earnest concern about the stuff that Sojourner House is addressing?
Yeah, it depends on every board member. Personally, I don't have my life story. I've been blessed with amazing parents and a wonderful, loving husband, and I've never had to worry about my own safety for a day in my life. But I believe when you've been blessed like that, you have to give back.
Yeah, I absolutely get it.
You've got to help.
So all right, so we'll talk about what maybe some of the solutions are, what this grant's actually going to do, and then we'll kind of touch on the. I'd really like to talk about some of the societal issues that I think are not going in the right direction. Stay with us, please. Alrighty, so that's a legislative hearing. I'm not sure that that's exactly what I was looking for. I thought we had a piece of sound there, Jess, but those are guns, and those are law enforcement officials, and they are testifying about a domestic violence and guns piece of legislation that passed the General Assembly this past session. You're not going to do any deep digging on that particular legislation here, but you support it, correct?
Sure, absolutely. We don't think abusers should have access to guns.
Yeah, the whole debate was about the definition of the abuser, right? In terms of what miscellaneous claim could be made against generally a man who is in a relationship. I say generally because it's not always that way.
Right.
And whether this is a get around NRA typical debate type of thing. But I think one would have to understand that if you are in an abusive relationship and the abuser has access to weapons, not only is that an acute worry, but it's also terribly intimidating.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Just horrifying.
Right. I mean, at the very least, the threat that your abuser could harm you with a gun is there.
Right.
And contributes.
And you see that from time to time, or often?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, abusers often make threats to harm their victim, whether or not they have firearms, honestly. But obviously, having access to firearms makes it more likely that there could be an injury.
It's funny when I asked before the show and show prep, where is the Sojourner House? You've got a facility on Smith Street, but for the most part, you've got facilities all around town, all around the region, that you're not talking about, because you need anonymity, you need protection, you need security. I mean, that's the kind of work that you're doing.
Absolutely. We have a lot of residential programs, and they're in confidential locations for that reason. Mm-hmm. We don't want the public to have access to where we're located. Mm. We don't want abusers to find out where victims might be staying.
Is that chase on all the time? Once a victim is in that dynamic, do they find themselves out and safe at some particular point, or is it constant? Is it a chronic look over your shoulder type of worry for most of the clients that you're dealing with?
Well, it really depends. I mean, a lot of it is case by case. So there are certain victims that we work with who have very persistent abusers that might be actively involved in a very tenuous situation. Some victims come to us after they've already left their abuser, and maybe the abuser's not a threat anymore, but they still need services, housing, a way to get back on their feet. So every case is a little different, but we definitely deal with everything from an emergency crisis situation. I mean, it doesn't happen every day, but we do get those calls where someone says, I'm really afraid my abuser is going to cause bodily harm to me. I need somewhere to go tonight. Everything from that to someone who reaches out to us who's homeless or about to be homeless because of the domestic violence at some point.
And of course, you know, every time these stories come to the media's attention, it's not good. By the time it gets to the media's attention, something terrible has happened.
Right.
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 Absolutely.
That's the part of this whole thing that is horrifying. Talk to me about the trends, though, in boy-girl relationships and our young people. I mean, you know, having raised a young woman who's now 22 years of age, you know, I've you know, the dating process and her friends and the whole thing going on, and so you start to, you know, refocus on that generation. I don't think it's like horrifying, but there's some things I see. All you gotta do is go to the mall and see how kids are dealing with each other, and I think with the good part of girls and young women feeling self-identity and equality and all that kind of stuff, sometimes it translates to equitable physicality, and you know, they can be as some of the behaviors that I think were kind of traditional bad behaviors by men and boys seem to be across the board a little bit now. Am I missing something here?
Well, we certainly say...
You're looking at me funny.
I'm not looking at you funny.
No, you were looking at me funny.
Abuse can happen in all kinds of relationships, and not just heterosexual relationships. I mean, it can be boy-boy, girl-girl. There are different types of relationships, and we definitely...
I forgot it's 2017, and we've got to characterize all... I get that, but just remember, I'm an old fart here who's just looking at this thing saying, I don't like the idea that, you know, I see a kid in the mall kind of, you know, giving his girl a little bang on the shoulder and she laughs and thinks that's funny, or she gives him a whack, you know, or you know, I think there are more girls that are fighting each other. There's more physicality on that gender side, seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong about that, but
well, so a couple things.
Yeah.
There's definitely physicality among teenagers, and to that end, Sojourner House is predominantly a social service agency, crisis intervention. We're, you know, here to provide support when someone's in crisis or needs housing. But
are you getting in front of it?
But I was just about to say, I mean, our vision statement is we envision a world that's free of domestic violence. So we realize that in order to do that, we need to do preventative educational work. So we have a program that specifically works with middle and high school students. Increasingly, we've been doing a little more work on college campuses too. And we really feel like in order to change the numbers of intimate partner violence that we see, we're going to have to change cultural attitudes, and that's going to come about through education, and that's going to come about through talking with boys and girls about respect, about healthy relationships, about boundaries, about asserting yourself when you're not comfortable with something, about consent, you know, how to have these types of conversations. So that's work that we do, and we feel really strongly about it because there's no way that we can break this cycle of violence. And we know a lot about kids who witness domestic violence. We know that if you grow up in a household and you see your parents abusive, physical, that's what you absorb, that's what you process as a normal type of relationship, and so that's something that often is repeated in later generations. So the more work that we can do to help youth understand that's not the way that you interact, to understand how to be assertive, how to say that I'm not comfortable with that, or that doesn't make me feel comfortable, how to communicate. A lot of what we do with kids is helping them understand how to communicate, how to say, hey, you know, hey, I don't want you punching my shoulder, even though you just think you're joking around. You know, if that's not something you're comfortable with.
Am I wrong just in terms of the increased behavior, or is it just something?
Hard to know if it's increased behavior if we're just more aware of it, and we have more ways to capture it. I mean, we live in a very digital society. I mean, everyone is taking pictures and posting updates on their social media.
And the social media battering is unbelievable.
Oh, absolutely.
Don't you think?
Yeah, it's scary. I have two boys who are 7 and 10, so they're not quite, but it's scary. I want to freeze them where they are because it's so different than the way we grew up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the look over your shoulder is not just what it used to be. Now it's, you know, it's right in the palm of your hand on a smartphone that you got to deal with the kind of and kids are brutal to each other.
And it can be relentless. I mean, it could be that someone's bullying another person online and it's just repeated. It's not, I mean, it used to be that maybe you'd be bullied at school, but you went home at 3 o'clock or 3:30 and it'd be done for the day. And we now live in a time period where it can continue 24 hours a day, and we hear those stories.
Right, so when we come back, I want to, this notion of domestic violence is kind of interesting, and the idea that people just don't think it ever happens around them. It actually could be happening right under your nose. Stay with us. You know, after all these years doing interviews like this, the one thing I've come to understand, and then you see it around you every once in a while, is that this domestic violence thing has really no class boundaries. It has, you cannot pigeonhole this behavior or this, it's not even a behavior, it's what this dynamic, this tragic condition, what do you call it? How would you label it?
I think it's a public health epidemic. That's the way that I describe it. And to your point,
it happens everywhere.
It happens.
Low income, high income, white, black, purple, orange.
It doesn't
it's all
discriminate.
over the place.
I always say domestic violence doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter what socioeconomic class you're part of, what race, ethnicity, sexual orientation. We all know, there's no doubt that we all know someone who's been affected, whether or not they've disclosed that to you. There's still a lot of stigma in our society about being a victim of abuse, so a lot of people don't feel comfortable disclosing that they are in an abusive relationship or that they've been in an abusive relationship. But we know here in Rhode Island, for example, that 1 out of 4 women will be a victim of abuse at some point in their lifetime.
What?
Yes, which is comparable to the national average. The national average is also 1 out of 4 women. So think about all the women in your life. You know someone close to you who has either experienced or will experience abuse in their life.
I didn't realize the number was that high.
It is, yes. And like I said, that's also the national rate.
Wow. They need some money. They're, well, your fundraiser's in November?
Yes, November 17th.
We'll see if we can't draw some attention to that when we get closer to it. Unless there's a deadline to purchase tickets to the annual Masquerade Ball.
Not unless we sell out.
So we'll post this on Fox Providence and make sure you find out all the information about that. That 1 in 4 number is horrifying to me. I'd like to be able to break that out in future conversations about how that is. It 1 out of random every 4 women, or is it a particular sector of society type of thing?
Doesn't
I mean, I don't know how many women are working in this building, but you're telling me that 1 out of 4 of them is in a situation where they've. And the abuse is not necessarily physical, you're suggesting. It's
There are different, to be fair, there are different types of abuse. There's physical abuse, there's sexual abuse, there's emotional abuse, there's verbal abuse, there's financial abuse. I would never want to say one abuse is worse than another. I mean, we have worked with individuals who have been emotionally and verbally abused that have felt just as abused as someone who might be physically abused. So, I mean, there are different types of abuse, but absolutely 1 out of 4 women. We know up to 1 out of 7 men who identify as male will be a victim of abuse. So again, it's not even something that discriminates based on sex or gender.
Okay. Well, that conversation came up at the tail end of the program. It does maybe beg the question, you know, how do you define abuse? And at some point, maybe we'll continue the conversation. Maybe pop on the radio with me. We'll have more discussion about this.
Be happy to.
All right. Give some dough to the Sojourner House, will you? Buy some tickets to the Masquerade Ball and pay attention to these issues because they are all around you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Tell you what's next. Still shaking my head over that 1 out of 4 number. That is tough to swallow. And some of you, I'm sure, on the other side of the TV are saying, yeah, well, how do you define abuse? I think this is something we'll dig into a little further, not only here, but on the radio, weekdays 3 to 6 on WPRO. Amongst the things coming up this week, Ed Fitzpatrick, former Progeo columnist, now working in public relations at Roger Williams. He's got some thoughts on the Washington Press Corps, the press secretary position, and all of that. So make a note on that for Thursday. We'll see you tomorrow on the radio and back here tomorrow night. Thanks for watching. Good night.